I'll have 2 eggs over light, homemade apple.
Time now for Morning Rounds with CBS News Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. Jon LaPook and CBS News contributor Dr. Holly Phillips. First up, federal dietary guidelines released this week could change the way some of us eat and drink. The guidelines may have a big impact at a time when more than 2/3 of Americans are overweight or obese. Holly, what's the biggest change here?
Sure. Well, Anthony, one of the most dramatic changes is they've actually included a top limit of the amount of added sugar we should have in our diet. They say it should make up no more than 10% of our daily total caloric intake. And now these are added sugars. They don't include natural sugars that occur in things like milk or fruit. To limit our daily caloric intake to less than 10%, it's basically about 10 to 12 teaspoons of sugar a day. Many sodas, soft drinks, sports drinks already have 10 to 12 teaspoons of sugar each serving. So basically, they're saying in a thinly veiled way, take those things off your menu completely.
It sort of feels like it changes a lot, though. It feels like we're getting conflicting advice at times.
It does, and I think people are confused, and one of the things they're trying to do here is to make it less confusing, and this 10% number, I think, it's a good idea, because you're saying less than 10% of your calories should be...
I don't think most people, John, even have any idea what percent of their calories are in there.
Right.
Well, okay, so now we're translating it to reality. So Holly said 10 to 12 teaspoons of sugar. Less than 10% of your total calories should be from saturated fat. That translates to about a fast food cheeseburger, and less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium in your diet, and that's about a teaspoon of table salt.
What types of foods, Holly, should be encouraged, are being encouraged here, and what should be avoided?
Right. Well, one of the things that I thought was nice about the guidelines is they did, in fact, focus on kind of overall eating patterns, not just the numbers. So they say to increase your amount of lean protein, increase the amount of fruits and vegetables. 9 out of 10 Americans don't actually eat enough vegetables in a day. We should focus on things like whole grains, healthy oils, olive oil, canola oil, and then we should try to eat less of certain things. Less saturated fats, which are primarily found in animal products, right? Red meat, processed meat. We should limit added sugars, as we already talked about, and limit the amount of sodium.
Well, I think guidelines are probably great for you guys, because then you can say, here's what I'm referencing. But what are the impacts you actually think guidelines like this have on people?
I think they very often have very little impact, because people just punt and they say, I don't want to know, I can't follow that 10% of this, I don't want to do the math. But here's an example of why you really do need to read the label. I have brought a little show and tell. This is a piece of white bread.
Right.
This is a spinach wrap. You might think that the spinach wrap is better for you than the piece of white bread.
Healthier, that would be my assumption.
Okay. Piece of white bread, 90 calories, no saturated fat. Spinach wrap, 210 calories, 2 grams
Almost
of
3
saturated
times.
fat.
Wow.
So how would you know that? You can get faked out. You have to read the labels. At the end of the day, you can't just punt it. This is your health. And I'm not just talking about short-term health. We're talking about over 10, 20, 30 years, your risk of having all sorts of problems, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, even cancer. So you spend time doing all sorts of research for other things in your life. Do it for something that you're putting into your body and that's affecting your body.
Well, I would ask you if you brought processed meats, but I know I'm not supposed to have them.
And just to add to John's point, even if if individuals don't focus so much on the guidelines, they still have a huge impact on our society. They help us to make school lunch menus. They have an impact on food assistance programs like WIC, and they also impact how our nutrition labels read. So whether or not we really focus on them, they're really going to have an impact on the whole society.
Well, next up, the brave new world of health. In his new book, The Lucky Years, CBS News contributor Dr. David Agus writes that medical breakthroughs are reaching a tipping point. Simon & Schuster, a division of CBS, is the publisher. John spoke with Dr. David Agus about the book and the role that data will play in the future of medicine.
We all have to start to collect our own data. The doctor's office now, your office, my office, is a patient comes in, we measure everything, we draw their blood, and we call them a few days later. The doctor's office of the future is they come in with their data. They probably get a pinprick at home where they can measure things on a lab on a chip. We can measure their blood pressure over time, their weight, their heart rate, their insulin, all of that data. And we can actually sit down and do something which is pretty wild called have a conversation with somebody.
Right.
And sit there for that 10, 15, 20 minutes they're with us and actually talk about the data instead of calling them a few days later.
These days, everything has to be evidence-based medicine. But what you're saying is if you gather the data outside, that's very important, but just having the old-fashioned conversations important, and then it can all build up and be combined and rolled up into something called, it's a dirty word now, intuition.
Oh.
You talk about intuition in the book, and I love that discussion. So tell me about that.
I mean, there's a great story if you put 10 Rembrandt experts in a room and 10 paintings on the wall. One is of a forgery, 9 are real. They all go, real, real, fake, real, and they're right. And then you go to each of them and say, why is this a forgery and why is this real? And they go, I don't know. The human brain is amazing at looking at something and making judgments. So you and I have seen thousands of cases, and we could start to say, that's going to be more aggressive than that one. And we can't always tell you why, but there's something to it. So I talk about all these great technologies in the lucky years, but the greatest technology I have, by far and away at my fingertips, is to go to a patient and say, how do you feel? Mm-hmm. It trumps every piece of technology I have. I couple that, with my art, and it's powerful. The hope is these technologies will make the poor physicians, up to so everybody's the same level. And it really will be a democratizer for care in our country, but there still will be a role for the art of medicine.
The Lucky Years is available now, and for more of that interview, go to cbsthismorning.com. What an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I love, how do you feel?
Yes.
Right? If you let patients talk long enough, they'll actually tell you what's the matter. And I love the fact that he's such a scientist. He's so excited. I think this is a terrific book, and he just nails it right where it should be, at right the perfect level. But you can combine all the science and fancy schmancy stuff and the high tech with the low tech, with touching somebody's hand and what value that has. And by the way, when somebody comes into your office and the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, that is not scientific, but you've learned after a long time being a doctor, you trust those kinds of instincts.
You can have all the information in the world. The secret is how you interpret it, what you do with it. All right. Finally, the Beatles sang that money can't buy me love. But what about happiness? A new study might have an answer. A study of more than 4,600 people finds that valuing your time more than the pursuit of money is linked to greater happiness. I can't say I'm surprised by this, but money's not such a bad thing.
One of the things that I found interesting, though, about this study is that the older people got, the more likely they were to value their time over money, which is, it becomes a more valuable resource. The less time we have, the more we value it. But one caveat is that millennials seem to really value their time, and they're asking for more of a balance in the workplace. So we might see a little tipping point there.
And you know the old expression, nobody at the end of their life on their deathbed ever said, if only I had worked more.
Right. Well, for all the people who will lose the Powerball tonight, it's a good reminder. Dr. Jon LaPook, Dr. Holly Phillips, thank you both so much.